Okay, so this is where we left off, and I'm going to go ahead and save this again because you don't want Maya to crash and lose this work. So save scene as, and I'll call it, looks like I've already got a whole bunch of different names here, don't I? We'll call this for video 01, and that way I have that in case we lose anything, we can always come back to this point. But the next thing we're going to want to do is sort of set this up to where it starts deforming our character. And so we already saw how skinning worked, right? We select the joints, we select the model we want to deform, and we do skin, bind skin. So let's try that really quick. I'm going to select this top root joint, right? And that's actually the parent of all of these other joints, so that's okay. And then I'm just going to hold shift and select all of the mesh above it. So all of these objects are going to be skinned to this joint chain. Okay, and so if I go to skin, bind skin, I'm going to go to my options. Just to be safe, what I would do is I would reset your settings just to make sure everything's okay. The only thing that are really different is on my max influences, I usually set that down to 4. A lot of video game setups really prefer 4 over 5. And then we can choose the other thing as our bind method. And so each of these are going to work a little differently. Just from my experience, though, I think, let me rephrase that. From re-rigging this character earlier, closest in hierarchy is going to give us our best result. Heat map usually does the best overall, but depending on how the model is constructed, you may get some errors from it, and so I don't really want to deal with that right now. And geodesic voxel does alright as well. So closest distance, though, if we did closest distance, then what it's going to do is it's going to skin joints to it based off of the distance those joints are from that vertex in the world, right? And so let me show you what happens like that. If I did bind skin with closest distance, and I grabbed this leg and moved it, you'll see that we're getting some skinning issues there, right? So let's undo that. Yeah. And so go back to skin again, bind skin, and I'm going to do closest in hierarchy. And so I'm going to do bind skin there. We're still going to get some issues, but you'll see that leg isn't really affecting it as much. We're getting a little bit there, but I'm not too worried about that. The biggest thing that we're going to be getting on this one that's an issue is sort of the way this head squashes, right? That's because the head is actually being deformed by the leg some as well. And really, I just want this thing to be completely controlled by my root joint. Okay, so in terms of skinning, we'll come back and work on that a little bit later. Okay, so we have some skinning on here. Actually, no, let's go ahead and talk about skinning now. I'm changing the order of this a little bit. So, like we said, the reason this is affecting it this way is because multiple joints are affecting this model. So if I right-click on this model and go to Paint Skin Weights tool, you're going to see a couple of things. You're going to see that these are all the joints that are affecting it. And so the root is affecting it, right? And it looks like it's affecting it entirely, except for when you'll see that it's a little bit gray instead of white. And so if I click on left hip, you'll see left hip is affecting it some, and the knee is affecting it some, and the right hip is affecting it some. And I don't really want that. I just want the root to affect it. And so if I just started painting, let's replace, set the value to 1, start painting, and I can paint it all to 1. But I may miss some stuff, like I may forget about that part over there, and then when I move it, I'll be like, oh, it's still not working right, I'm getting some weird deformation, right? So this is one of the reasons we're doing a robot, is because in this case, I just need that entire thing to be fully white, right? So if I paint Skin Weights tool now, set my value to 1, set it to replace, and just hit flood, it will flood that entire model with white for the root bone, right? And so I can actually just go through that and do this with all of these objects. So I can just flood that. Can I do more than one at a time? I don't remember. Apparently I can. So that's nice. Did that work? Hey. So that means I can go ahead and grab the skirt and this hoop as well, do Paint Skin Weights, and I'm just going to flood those entirely to the root as well. Now later I may do a little dynamics or something on that skirt to change that up and let the knees hit it, but right now I'm okay with this. Okay, and so that's all completely skinned to that. Now if I go grab this joint here and I bend it, you'll see I'm getting some deformation in the back of the legs I'm not completely happy with. Right, so I could paint some skin weights there, and I can go to the knee and I can tell it I want that to be a little more highly affected. I don't want it to be gray in there. I want that to be white a little higher. But my brush is really big, right? So if I hold down B, I can sort of rescale my brush and drag it down. And so now I can go in here and sort of paint additional white into that area to make it be affected a little bit better. Right. And so this probably isn't going to be the last pass of skinning we'd have to do on this, but it's helping. And then for the ankle, I want this ankle to be completely affected at the bottom down here. And so this may be a little bit better now. All right. And then in terms of the maybe a little too much. If you hold down shift, you can smooth it. And so for the hip, I want to paint a little bit more white in there, and just so we get a little bit more of that deformation the way I think it would work. And so now that's just deforming a little more like I would like it. And so that's how we're going to work with our Paint Skin Weights tool. I will say painting skin weights is very frustrating for most people because you think you have it right in one position and then it messes up in another position, and it takes a while. This is the equivalent of UVs for animating. Like it's frustrating, it's time consuming, but you need to do it to get a good result. So, the thing I did not want to do was that though. Crap. I don't remember where I set that at. Was it 0? It was not 0. Okay, so let me go back until I'm going to reset my joint height. There we go. So that's a problem because I didn't know that was the number. So ignore that I left it like that. And you won't want to manipulate that yet either. So, but that's how we would paint the skin weights on that. And again, probably the same with these guys. So I would right click, paint skin weights. Actually, I'm going to have to do these one at a time. My bad. Paint skin weights, and I want to flood that to the left ankle. Right. W. Flood that to the right ankle. And then in terms of the toe, I'm going to right toe, flood that. Left toe, flood that. Okay, and now this should manipulate the way we would want it to. Now, with the exception of the back of the knees, and I can go back and work that later. Right. Okay, so so now we're going to save this one more time. So 5, increment and save. And what that just did is I just added a 0001 to the end of that. And every time I hit increment and save, it'll save an increment of it. And that way I can go back if I mess something up. Right. So now we have this. And so what we need, though, is, like, you'll see that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 11 bones, right? And then these 2 IK handles. And so that means it's 13 objects that we would have to try to figure out how to animate one at a time if we wanted to animate this character, right? And we could do that, but that's not really how I want this to work. I want to get everything manipulated. Like if I wanted to wiggle the toe, I would have to go get that joint and wiggle the toe, only wiggle it in one axis. And so I want to minimize the number of things I actually have to manipulate for this, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create some controllers for this. So I'm not going to animate directly on the bone. I'm going to animate on some curves. So I'm going to create a curve. I'm just going to create a NURB circle. Okay. And what you'll see with my NURB circle is it's a very large, or I can scale it up and down and make it whatever size I want to, but it's just a ring. And if I right click on it, control vertex, I can actually change the shape of this if I wanted to. If I wanted to make it look a little bit more interesting, I could do something like this, right? But either way, it's just an object with a pivot point, and that's our pivot point. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to snap this to my joint. So I'm going to hide my mesh, because if I don't, it'll snap it to parts of the mesh. Okay, and when I can move it up and get it close, but when I want it to be exact, if I hold down V as in Victor, right, it will snap to a point, and it considers that location of that joint a point. And so I can snap it to each of those, right, while I move it. And so now it's perfectly aligned with that joint, right? And I'm going to hit Control D to duplicate that, move it down. And I'm going to snap this one to my ankle. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and scale that down to something more reasonable. I can turn my mesh back on just so I can see it, because we just want these to be visible so I can grab those, right? And then Control D again, V to snap it to that angle. Okay. So we're going to do just a little bit more house cleaning here. I have a bunch of joints, and I have these 2 IK handles, and all of those things are nice, but sometimes I want to be able to turn those on and off and just see the controls, right? So I'm going to add that to a layer as well, and I'll call this rigging layer, right? And now if I wanted to at any point, I can turn all of that stuff on and off, right? And so we're going to do that later when it's time to animate. And then I can probably go ahead and grab these two and add that and call this control layer. Okay, so I can turn those on and off. So this is just some organizational stuff, but now you'll see that when I'm going to animate this, I can just freeze my mesh layer, set it to reference, and that way all I'm grabbing is the controls, right? It just makes it more efficient. Right now I'm going to be working mainly with these guys though. And so what I want is I want to be able to manipulate this around, and I want it to control that joint. Now we've seen that we can do that with a hierarchy. If this joint was a child of this control or this circle, sorry, I'll pick up this video in a minute.